Should
Hello,
I?
friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Our guest today is an author known for her novels in the Pathfinder world of Galarian, not to mention her Dragon Age novels and Athelis series, and I'm probably going to pronounce that wrong, but please welcome Liane Merciel to Epic Realms. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I have to apologize for the terrible lighting. I don't do a lot of these, and so it's just kind of library ceiling lighting. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. It's not like you got you don't need the professional like lighting setup all around where you're at, so it's not a big deal. And for the people listening to the podcast, they can't tell anyhow, so we're good there.
Excellent.
Did I pronounce that right? Your first book series. What was that? What was the series called with
Yeah.
the?
So there were two books in that series, the Lost series. That was The River King's Road and Heaven's Needle, and I've kind of like dumped them into the back holes of my memory, but they were fun to write. But yeah, soon after writing those, I did the transition into tie-in, which was also really fun because you get to play in worlds where someone else has already done all of the heavy lifting. They've built everything out, they've come up with the rules set, and so I just thought that that was much easier and more fun.
Nice.
But yeah.
So you grew up moving around and growing up kind of all
Yeah.
over the U.S., right? How much did you move around, and do you think that that helped you or hindered you in your writing?
Well, we moved around a lot because my dad was in the army, and I don't know if it was the moving itself that gave me material to work with so much as the somewhat unusual circumstances. My dad was, well, let me put it this way. One of my earliest memories was I was 5 years old, and my dad brought out a spool of wire and taught me how to make rabbit snares. And this is when we were living in Alaska. And then we went out, and he's like, and this is a wild cabbage patch. And this is where you plant it. You look for the little rabbit trails, and then you put this steel noose over the rabbit trails. And like on one level, that's super messed up, but you can see where that feeds into, fantasy world building.
Right, where that's their way of getting food.
Right. So I never actually did catch a rabbit myself, but there was a lot of that. There was another time when we were again living in Alaska. We went out to this frozen lake and we had axes and a chainsaw and we cut blocks of ice out of the lake and then built an igloo on the front lawn, a real functional igloo, and I lived in there for a week.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was surprisingly warm. I would
Yeah,
just sit in there.
I'm always surprised by that. With the you try to keep the warm temperature in, and you'd think that the ice would melt, but just the structure just doesn't. That just doesn't happen. So it's really
So yeah,
fascinating.
there's a lot of weird stuff like that. And wherever we went, there would always be something along those lines of just like, here's a different environment. Here are the things you can do in that environment. So we moved down to Washington State, and then there it was all about the wild blackberries, which grow everywhere there, and wild hazelnuts, and how to catch fish and that kind of thing. And then we moved to Germany, and that was fun because I got to see all of the castles in real life and go down, and they'll do a number of just really amazing tours. And you can see both what was actually real then and then what later people kind of embroidered onto it. Like I think there's I don't know if it's actually officially called the Torture Museum in Rothenburg, but there's one of those that has all of those crazy devices that nobody historically actually used,
Right,
but um, they're there and you can go look at them in the museum.
and be curious about how terrifying they are.
Yeah, which, again, fed into a lot of the stuff that I ended up writing for Pathfinder because it was like in Cheliax, people get tortured to death. And it was like, I
Right,
know how that works.
for sure. Did you write a lot when you were younger? When you were a kid?
I did, yeah. I grew up reading. So in the army bookstores, they had just a ton of role-playing material because it's very popular with the armed forces. You got a lot of downtime to kill, and so gaming was very big there. And I remember at the end of every season, they would have these big, big like warehouse sales essentially. And I found the old Dragonlance trilogy with the Larry Elmore cover on it.
Yeah.
And the artwork was so beautiful and compelling. And I was like, I don't know, maybe 10 years old at the time. I had no idea what the story was about. I didn't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons or Dragonlance or anything. But I was just like, that looks cool. I wonder what's in that book. So I bought that and then just got like pulled into the whole thing and thought it would be really cool to be able to write one of those one day. That
Yeah.
was my dream. I didn't want to be like a New York Times bestseller. I didn't want to have a movie adaptation. I wanted to write those books.
Yeah. That's really cool. I had a similar in school. I picked up the Ursula K. Le Guin series because of the scholastic cover of the wizard with the staff up and the dragon breathing, smoke out. I was just, that is so cool. I want to read that. And that was my intro into the genre, if you will.
Yeah, cover artists are just, they've brought so many kids in.
Right? Right? For sure. What was school like? We were talking about you bouncing around a lot, and did school have a hand in your writing as well?
Not directly, not until I went to college and like did all the medieval history stuff. One thing that did happen was when we were in Germany, my parents thought it would be good and character building, I think was the phrase they used, to enroll me in a German school. I didn't speak German, but they were like, it'll be good immersion. You'll learn quickly.
Wow.
So I did that for 3 years. By the end of it, I could pass. Like I could earn passing grades, except in Latin, because it turns out if you don't speak German, then learning Latin in German is actually quite difficult. So I failed Latin, like straight Fs across the board. Only class in my life I've ever failed, and I'm still bitter about it.
Wow. Not you just go back and be like, look at me now. Look at me now.
Yeah, I still don't know Latin.
What were some of your other influences writing when you were a kid? You mentioned Dragonlance and that. Were there
Yeah,
other books or just the
I
Dragonlance
love,
series?
no, I loved a lot of the Forgotten Realms stuff. Elaine Cunningham was one of my favorite authors when I was a kid. I don't know, there was just something extra compelling about her characters. They seemed to have like that extra degree of humanity. So I thought that was really cool. I thought R.A. Salvatore wrote amazing fight scenes. I was just like, how does he choreograph them so precisely?
Yeah, for sure.
um, so yeah, I loved that, and then all of the classics too. Lloyd Alexander, obviously Tolkien. Um, yeah, all that. Just like 80s into 90s fantasy, I know them all.
Right. Did you get into the actual role playing, the games at all?
I tried to. I actually tried to join one of those army groups I was talking about. And they were like, "You're a kid, you can't." So
Wow.
I did the classic blunder of trying to start my own group as a kid who did not really understand the rules with my younger siblings as the players. And there was just
Oh, that's hilarious. But so many people, they get their start there. That's how they get going. So, I just assumed maybe that might be the case as well.
no, but I did actually get into it later on in high school. Actually, that's how I met my husband. We were playing on those AOL chat room games, and my character wanted to learn some spells that his character had. So I
Okay.
was like, I know how to make this happen. And then we got married. So
I think there might be some stuff in between there that you're skipping out on, but we don't need to
no,
go
yeah,
there.
pretty much it was.
So when you first started after high school, you mentioned that you ended up going to college and you did some stuff there. What kind
Yes.
of was your influence for where you were going to go and kind of what you wanted to learn while you were there?
Well, where I wanted to go was like honestly, I just went to the best school that I got into. Um, Figuring that if nothing else, I could trade on the prestige of a name to like have greater flexibility in career choices later on.
Okay.
And then I thought, well, if I'm going to law school, then my undergrad major doesn't actually matter that much. So I have freedom to do what I want to do. And so I just took a bunch of medieval history classes. That's pretty much what I did. Figuring, like I can't translate this into a job, but I don't need to.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Were there challenges in that?
Well, some of my professors got really mad when I made the mistake of telling them why I was taking their classes. They were just like, this is all very serious stuff. And I'm like, uh-huh, tell me more about how people like used to fight over acorns.
But a lot of that stuff you used in your novels, right? Like that
Oh yeah,
information helped you.
it was absolutely invaluable. And I am truly very grateful to those professors because they taught me so much. And reading the primary sources and understanding where all of these epics have their roots was incredibly valuable to learn. So even if they didn't appreciate my clumsy freshman way of trying to explain that to them, I am truly and deeply grateful to all of those professors and all the things that they taught me.
You kind of have your two worlds between your writing and practicing law. were they kind of parallel from the onset after college? Like, did you start writing right away and working, or was one
Well,
coming later than the other?
in law school, there was no time to write. I had to spend all of my time studying, and so that was just like a nothing happening period. And then I got my first job, and it was super stressful at first because I didn't understand how anything worked. And so I practiced criminal law, and I didn't understand how criminal courtrooms work in real life, which is just everybody yells at you all the time, and they're very mean and they're very impatient if you don't understand how everything is supposed to work. So that took a second to get used to. But then once I got a handle on it, then I finally had time to get used to that. And then so I would write at that point. I would get up super, super early, like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, write a little bit, hit the gym, come back, write again, go to work, and then come back from work and just like pass out. And that was it. So it was kind of a miserable monastic lifestyle and not sustainable outside of your early 20s, but it worked. I banged out the first book in about 3 months, figuring it was just going to be a practice manuscript, and I would build up a thick skin by getting it rejected by every agent I could send it to.
Right.
And then to my surprise, it actually sold, and then like that's kind of where everything started. But I was just writing that one as fast as I could before I slowed down enough to scare myself with the audacity of what I was trying to do.
Yeah. What was that process like for you? For the first time sitting down and be like, okay, I'm going to write this book. And, it sounds like you didn't have a ton of experience putting a novel together, correct?
No, I didn't have any. That was the first time I had tried it. I did write a number of short stories first, which is what I always tell people now. If they're like, how do you get started? I'm like, well, practice with short stories first, because then you get the structure down, the pacing, the sentence level, just how to build a scene type stuff. And then after that, I had a loose outline for kind of where I wanted the novel to go, what beats I wanted to hit. And then I would just sit down and try to get, from point A to point B all the way across the map. Um, and that was it. Like, again, I thought it was just going to be a practice exercise. So I wasn't super stressed about like making the language all flowy and beautiful. It was just kind
Right.
of like, does it work? Okay, great.
And then that book got picked up, right?
Yeah, yeah, it did. It sold. And that was fun and terrifying. And then they wanted a sequel to it, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I definitely had no experience writing to deadline. So that was so stressful that I was sick for, I think, 12 straight weeks because my immune system just crashed and burned.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah. And then after that, I was like, maybe I should just write tie-in. Maybe that's easier for life, which it turned out it definitely was.
I see. So I'm assuming the first one is the River Kings, right? That's the one you're talking about.
Yeah. Mhm.
How was the process after between them telling you wanted a sequel and you getting it like accepted? What was your mindset like? Oh my gosh, I was just practicing this and it got accepted right away. I can't wait till this comes out. And what was your expectations for the book?
I truly had no expectations because I had no idea what was going to happen. I was just like, I hope people don't hate it, and I hope they don't write nasty reviews, because if they do, I will cry. And that was kind of it. That was where it started and ended.
Did you ever want to do a third one?
Um, I think I could have come up with a story if people had asked for that, but I did not have one in my head. So it was kind of like, a lot of those TV shows where it's just like, it gets picked up for a second series and you're just like, oh, well, I only had one story.
Yeah. So that's not a thing that you're like, man, I really want to get that third. A lot of people have that feeling where they got to get a third one out. If they have two, they can't not let it go. But
No, I feel it was a lot more like Shogun getting picked up for more seasons, and you're just like, okay, but the book stopped there. So
okay, fair enough. So how did you connect with Paizo? I know you did a short story. Was that kind of where that started?
no, so what happened with that was I guess Pierce Waters at Paizo had read The River King's Road and was just like, oh, this actually reads like whoever wrote it had a background in gaming, because a lot of this mechanically feels a lot like role-playing games, which is like weird.
Yeah.
So then he reached out to my agent and was like, do you think this person would have any interest in writing for Pathfinder? And I was like, yes, I would like to live out my childhood dream. Thank you very much for asking.
And so where did it go from there? They're just like,
So
here's a short story. or you were
Yeah,
like, I'm here, I have a short story?
yeah. They were just kind of like, "Do you want to write a short story?" And then they gave me the word count for it, and they wanted it to be in, I think, 4 parts. I think it was supposed to be 4 parts of about 1,000 to 1,500 words apiece. And that was just kind of like an audition to get a sense for the world, see if I was willing to do the research, see if the tone matched what they were looking for.
Yeah.
And so I think that early short story ended up being pretty different from what I ultimately wrote novel wise, but the characters came back. Um, and then I guess that worked out, and they were like, "Where do you want to write?" And I was thinking about it, and so like one of my big things with writing is because my background is as a GM. In the back of my mind, I'm always thinking of like, what is the most horrific, awful image I can come up with that would really terrify and disgust my players? And if I can nail that, I feel like somebody who just like hits that perfect tennis shot or like hole in one on a golf swing feels so good, right?
Yeah.
So when they told me that, I was thinking about this being like, the main thing that I'm trying to achieve, um, just secretly to amuse myself whenever I write a book. And I'm like, well, I could do Nidal or I could do Cheliax. How about one of those two? I feel like those are good fits for my skill set.
And here you
And
ended
then,
up getting to do both eventually, right?
yeah, it was great. I was so happy.
What was it that drew you to doing writing about Nidal?
Um, well, I was just like, on paper, back when I first got involved in it, on paper, it was kind of a really cool but underdeveloped concept. And I was like, I feel like potentially there could be a lot of nuance and depth here,
Yeah.
but also it could very easily flatten out into like a cartoon type world. Um, and again, like I thought it was just like really interesting to me. Like, how would this work mechanically? Like, how would it feel to live there? And why hasn't everybody gone just like absolutely insane? How is this still a quasi functioning
Right.
society? So I just really wanted to dig into like how I thought that could work.
How much world building did they give you the freedom to do, as opposed to
Um,
like, this is how this works, this is how
mhm.
that works?
So as far as uh, Nidal goes, I had almost complete freedom as long as it didn't contradict anything that had already been established. So, like the capital is the capital and this is the ruling hierarchy. But in terms of like fleshing all of that out, yeah, they let me pretty much do that. And then obviously parts of the game world that were more built up, that had more prominence, like Cheliax and the World Wound and all of that stuff, there was a lot more constraint in terms of, just not contradicting what other people had done
Right.
and not interfering with where the adventure paths were going to go. But there was still a lot of freedom there.
Did they give you a lot of hey, follow these rule sets, or make sure the character, you could stat out your characters or anything like that?
Well, yeah, everything had to go by like what was then first edition rules.
Hmm.
So it had to be possible to stat it out, but there was also room to invent new creatures, invent new spells, as long as it would be possible to stat it out and it didn't break anything in the game.
Nice. Did you find freedom in doing that, being a person who had been role playing a little bit now,
Oh yeah, I thought it
and
was great.
and writing?
Oh, it was perfect. I was so happy because I was like, so all my homebrew can become canon now. And
That's every game master's dream, right?
I know it was so good. I loved it. Yeah, that was great.
Before you came on to Pathfinder, were you playing Pathfinder, or were you playing D&D, or what were you playing?
So at that time, I was playing this weird, janky homebrew system that me and a couple of friends had come up with, and it made no sense, and the rules were really bad. So actually, moving to a set of rules that worked was so relieving
Did you
because
have
our system,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. Our system was kind of like, I want to say broadly D20 based. Like it had its roots in D20, but one of the collaborators to that system just like had no concept of how math works. Um, so there was a lot of stuff. I guess ultimately it's not too surprising to say that kind of imploded because some of us wanted the rules to make sense and some of us didn't comprehend that as a
Yeah.
thing.
When you started on, did you have to go and like get some of the books and read the stats and learn how the game was played, or did you already kind of have an idea of that?
Well, it was first edition, so I mean it was really close cousins to D&D at that time.
Correct. Yeah.
And it was also like heavily rooted in D20, which I had been reading a lot of those source books even though I wasn't actively playing it at the time, so I kind of already knew how the rules worked.
Okay. Sounds good. Uh, so you had a lot of like credits in a lot of the RPG books as well that they came out with.
Yes.
like the Nidal book. What is the differences between writing one of the novels and then doing some of that material? Was it different for you? What kind of stuff did you contribute to those kinds of books?
It is a little bit different, but I've always been part of, or like primarily what I write is, the lore and the fluff and not so much the actual crunchy rules, mechanics type stuff. Um, which I can do a little bit of, but I think kind of like where the line gets drawn for me personally is monster entries. I can give you the background and the ecology of the monster and how it works and like what I think the mythology of the monster should be. And in terms of actual stats, I'm just like, I don't know, here's some numbers that make it look really hard. You can fix this in editing.
That's hilarious.
Sometimes I'll just put like bracket big number, hard to hit, and then just like let them fix it.
How much notes do they give you when you're doing stuff like that?
It depends. It honestly depends on the project. Um, like for the kaiju, it was kind of like we want it to be huge and mythic and world shaking and so incredible that literally a twitch of its tail could level a city block. And I was like, okay, that's I can write that, but I don't know how you stat that. I don't know how you stat that. And then for other stuff, it'll be much more open ended, kind of like what is some cool stuff about dwarf clans? I don't know. Here, write dwarf clans. So it truly depends on the project, and I've always been very grateful to the Paizo developers because I feel like they do a great job of giving just enough structure that whatever you write is likely to be usable for their project. Um, so you don't waste your time writing stuff that isn't what they want, but also gives you a great degree of creative freedom.
Yeah. Is there a lot of researching that you have to do with that, or can you just write to them and be like, hey, I need information on this, and then they just send you a bunch of stuff?
So if you're a contributor, you have access to digital files of everything they put out. And sometimes they'll point you towards particular resources and say, this is a good book that you should look at in order to make sure that whatever you're writing is consistent. But you don't have to like specifically request files because it's all there. It's just a question of like, do you know where to look in the library?
Yeah. When you're going through and you're writing, say, one of these novels, what do you think your strategy is for like building something new that's going to be later established in canon, in splat books, and little things that they publish back out? Do you have a plan and be like, this is what this is going to eventually be, or do you make something or create something and then it just takes on a life of its own separate of that?
Generally, when I've built something of my own, it's because I need something to fill a narrative purpose, and there's nothing quite right in, the bestiaries or established in any of the rule books where it's just like, I don't know um, if there's anything there that does what I need this thing to do for plot purposes. So I'll just write in what it looks like or what it feels like and what role it plays in the story. And then if they need to stat it out, they'll do that.
All right, so we're talking about Pathfinder, but I'd be remiss if we didn't switch topics a little bit, because there's a new video game that came out recently, and I don't know if you're much of a video game person, but you wrote one of the Dragon Age novels. Tell us a little
Yes.
bit about that, how that came to be, and your thoughts on that.
So I'm actually extremely bad at playing video games. When I do a video game project, I literally have to get my husband to play it for me, and then I just watch him play it. And then we'll do that for, a couple of hours a day until we get through the entire game. Because I love watching video games. I'm just incredibly bad at playing them. So, like, most recently, we did Tears of the Kingdom, and I love watching it. It's beautiful landscapes. It's so well designed. The puzzles are great. But I can't even, like, hold the controller. I do not know which end of the controller is up. So, yeah, I just never learned. My first and last video game system was the Sega Genesis with old school Sonic the Hedgehog.
Nothing wrong with
Um,
Sonic,
no, it was a great game. I mean, I died a lot, but it was a great game. Last game I ever beat.
as long as you have fun with it. That's what matters. So did they
Yeah,
just
so
come to you and be like, "Hey, do you want to write this novel?" And then you're like, "Yeah,
yeah,
I'm in."
yeah, they asked, and I was like, "That's funny you should ask because we were just playing that game and I love it. So yes, I would love to do that."
Had you read the other novels previous to that?
I had not read the novels. We did play through the two games that were out at that time, and I loved them, but no, I had to go back and read the novels to make sure that I was kind of, imitating the tone that they wanted, or hopefully at least in the right ballpark.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we start to see some extra sales of that book with the new game coming out because, like I said, I'd be remiss if I didn't like it's going to be one of the hottest games and it's just kind of getting out there now. It's like, well, you wrote a Dragon Age novel. We should definitely talk about that. What was something you really enjoyed about writing that novel?
I think that one was really fun because it was set in the past of the main game's continuity. It was not really set so much in the present day, although there was a frame story that was, which gave me a lot of freedom to, again, not contradict anything that had already been established and make sure it was in keeping with that. But because it was in the past and it couldn't interfere with anything that the player characters were ever going to be able to do, I could just make up characters, and that was fun. And it was also a fun challenge to write the type of story where it's like, we know the ending, because the ending is a big part of the series lore. But how
Right.
do you make getting to that ending that everybody already knows interesting and compelling and hopefully, have some suspense, even though everybody already knows the outcome? So
Yeah.
that was fun. The other fun thing about that was I got to make my dog a canon character. So
That's great. What about Dragon Age? And everybody's got a different answer when I ask this. What is it about Dragon Age that makes it new and fresh from a lot of the other fantasy genres out there? Because when that game came out, when those books came out, there was just something new and different and unique that made it special. What are your thoughts on that?
that is a really great question. And it's something that I would have to think about because you're right. There was a lot there that felt really different. And there was also a lot there that felt just like very, I don't know, it was like you could play out all the classic stories. There's so many classic elements there. Um, a lot of just like things that tie back to themes of self sacrifice and enduring hardship because it's necessary and it helps other people.
Right.
And those are, of course, they go way, way back. That's, the oldest roots of the fantasy genre. Um, but I think the way that they did it, the way that this was cloaked in all of the rituals of the world, the sacrifices of the wardens, and another thing they did too that I thought was a really cool wrinkle was this thing of like elves are not great, mighty, superior beings the way that they are in Tolkien. They're actually a very downtrodden underclass. And
Yeah.
I thought that that was a fun, interesting wrinkle too. And just, magic having all of these downsides, which again is not new, but the way they did it was cool.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. It was one of my favorite series, books and video games. Are you hoping to have another novel or do anything more with that franchise?
I don't know. At the time that I finished that book, I was not really in a headspace to take on more projects, which is part of why I didn't end up writing a second Dragon Age novel at that time. So, if that bridge is not irreparably burned, and if they were to ask again, I think at this point I would be super excited to jump on it. But I didn't then, and I kind of regret that. But also, I don't think that I was in a space at that time to write a good enough novel for what the franchise deserved.
Okay.
So I kind of like have regrets, but also no regrets, I guess.
Yeah, it's understandable. Well, hopefully there is, and hopefully that door opens up for you, and we can get another one of those as well. Because I know a handful of people really love that series, and they love the work you did as well. So
I'm happy
um,
to hear that.
let's step back to Pathfinder. We
Mhm.
talked about Nidal, we talked about that series, and you mentioned wanting to do something maybe in Cheliax, but you ended up doing Nidal. But then later you did the Hell Knight book.
Yes, which is my favorite book. I think that's the only book I've done where I'm just like, yes, it came out the way I wanted it to, like completely.
What I really loved about that, and people that are listening that have read the book will probably agree with, is how you differentiated the different types of Hell Knights, as well as like what a paladin is and how they compare. Was that your plan going in to kind of set those differences going into that story? Or did that just kind of
Yes.
happen?
No, I'm like one of my big goals going into that was just to be like, I wanted to do all three types of lawful and how they would play off of each other and how they would conflict with one another. And I just like because I'm just a complete alignment nerd loser, I just that's really fun for me.
Right.
So
It was great to read because we could see you can see which ones are which and which way they followed.
yeah, I don't know, it's fun for me to like play with that system.
Yeah, for sure. When you were fleshing out those characters, what were your plans in bringing them together, and how did you kind of outline where that would work, how you could point those out sitting down?
Um, so, Cheliax is a good environment for that type of thing because it is such a unique and unusual society. And I think that Paizo as a team has done a great job just building out their world. So in Cheliax, you have this ancient history of back in the day, they were the flower of civilization, and it was a great and glorious time. And now things are kind of not so much that way. But as is often the case with empires that have fallen into that kind of draconian rule, everybody thinks they're the one true keeper of the flame. And if they all think that, and they all kind of have reasons to think that, how would that all play out? And if everybody thinks like, okay, yes, we all agree the laws are supremely important, but how are we going to interpret that and apply it with, nobody even questions whether or not we're going to follow the law. The question is only how. So
Yeah,
that allows you to shortcut a lot of the stuff, just using it in that society. And in the context of what was originally a murder mystery that has to be solved according to the rules of its society. So that was kind of the framework that I wanted to play with in order to get into the alignment stuff that just made my nerdy little heart happy.
that's great. Is there plans? Were there plans for you to do another one of those before they canceled the entire series, or maybe you did write one and it didn't happen? Because I know a bunch of authors have stuff that they wrote and then the novels kind of stopped happening and they're just sitting there in limbo. Do you have one of those stories that's sitting in limbo?
I do have one of what Mark Merlin calls the oubliette novels. The draft that I have in that limbo land is honestly not very good. And if it were ever threatened with the light of day, I would have to pull it back and like severely hammer on it to make it anything passable. So, yes, there is a manuscript. It does exist. It needs a lot of work. And because it's in limbo, I have not put that work in. But were it ever to be released, I think that there is a core of a good story there. I would just have to work on it for a while before I wanted anybody to read it.
Yeah. Does it tie into any of the other stuff that you did?
Yes, it is a not a direct sequel. It's like two-thirds of a sequel to Hell Knight.
Okay. Okay. So that brings us that brings us to now, right? There's a new book coming out because they again, we just mentioned they kind of stopped doing the Pathfinder Tales novels just and it was kind of abruptly at the time. And then
Yep.
earlier this year they sent out a message saying, "Hey, we're doing another Pathfinder novels. We're gonna start doing this again." And they said, "Hey, Leanne's going to be the first one." How did that
Yes,
come about to you? Did they just be like, "Hey, we want you to start this off," or was it just
it was an
happenstance?
incredible honor, and I'm just extraordinarily flattered and thankful that they asked me. But yeah, the question was just like, do you have time right now to take on a project? And if you do, would you be interested in writing something that's a little bit different in that it features the iconics as central characters and a lot more of the storyline is established because it needs to tie into specific events that are happening in the game world and other campaign, plans that they have for Galarian. So given those caveats, do you want to do this? And I was just like, hell yeah, yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. This one's a little bit different because it's not like you're not like creating your own characters in this series, right?
Yeah.
This is you're using this is the first time it's happened. You're writing for the iconics of Pathfinder.
Yes, which was scary because, they have very established personalities, they have established fan bases, and there's not really a whole lot of time in this particular story to, get into their background or who they would normally be before all of these gigantic world-shattering events are thrust upon them, and they're put through trials of their personality and their skills. So, yeah, it was a tricky assignment. Hopefully, I did an okay job with it. I don't know. But it was just kinda like, "Okay, here are all of these characters, get used to them, and then put them through the ringer."
Yeah, for sure. What was something that really stood out to you writing this? And I know you probably can't or don't want to give away certain things, but there is an overall story that's happening in the world of Pathfinder that kind of ties into this novel.
Yes, absolutely. And that was one where it was, I was given the outline for the events that needed to happen in the book. And they were very specific about a lot of the details because there are a lot of lore and world implications for things that happen in the novel. things that can be revealed, things that have to be set up, things that tie into plans that the team has, for the world. So a lot of it was detailed and laid out, and it was tricky. Yeah, I don't know if that's responsive to your question exactly.
No, that's all right. Yeah, I just think it's really neat that this is their way of like bringing us into this new big story, and I think the new story is called the War of the Immortals, right?
Yeah, War of Immortals. Yep.
And so this really ties in. So anybody who like really wants to get into that, they can read this book and get a really good backstory, a really good idea of where that is going and where that in game people that are actually gamers can kind of get some inspiration for the overarching world instead of just reading the book and being like, hey, this is what happened, but not really in a novel form like what you've done.
Yeah, one of their big concerns with that project was that they didn't want it to feel like the biggest possible event in the world had happened and nobody's home campaign had a part in it. So a lot of it was, there have to be seeds for different things that could happen, both lower level threats that, might be woven into people's home campaigns, plus big things that change the world and are very open ended. So it's kind of like, okay, this has happened, and these are now the big problems that remain for your groups to confront.
Yeah. We mentioned the iconics earlier, and there's a lot of them because every class has an iconic. Which ones are kind of the main players in the book?
So in this book, the primary iconics who drive this story are Ezrin, Kyra, Mariciel, and Amiri. And each of those characters was chosen for a specific reason. So Kyra, being the iconic cleric of Serenre, has the most obvious tie into a storyline where gods are threatened, gods can die.
Right.
So, and she has to question her faith as like a mortal servant of these powers that, suddenly need her in a very direct sense. And then Mariciel comes in because obviously she's Kyra's wife, but she isn't divinely empowered, and so she has to wrestle with her feelings about that. Ezrin is the iconic wizard. His power derives from the arcane and his mastery of learning. And there's not a whole lot I can say about his storyline without trespassing into spoiler
Okay.
territory, but
Okay. But
a
there
lot
is
of it
stuff. There's special stuff.
is. Yes, and the other key thing about Ezrin is that he is an atheist. He doesn't deny that the gods exist, but he doesn't feel that they deserve his allegiance, and so that's another angle that they wanted to bring in for the Godsrain and this big cataclysmic event. And then finally, Amiri, who is a worshiper of Gorham, and I guess at this point it's not really a spoiler to say Gorham dies. um, and so part of it was about what happens to somebody if the god that they venerated, although maybe didn't particularly, worship super devoutly, but nonetheless, your patron god dies. Where does that leave you? And also, again, without trespassing too much into spoiler territory, Amiri is a barbarian and her powers derive from rage. And that was something that they wanted to dig into in the storyline as well.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because obviously, like in the history, we talk about, Eridan, who had passed away as well. He was a deity, but you didn't really get to play through that. It's just kind of like this is the history. And so now you get to see that directly, whether it's in the novel or in the upcoming stuff that they're going to be releasing. So it's really, as you said, it's very special for us, the players, people who would make games, make campaigns that are set in this era of Pathfinder, to actually sit through that and play through that and get to see, because you don't get to see that in any of the other novels. You get to see the aftermath and the after effects, but you don't get to see its direct when it happens, and that's pretty new and unique, I think, in the Pathfinder world.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely what they were hoping that people would take away from it. So, yeah.
When you were doing this new one, did you have to keep in mind, we talked about, setting in the rules of first edition Pathfinder. Now with the new edition, did you have to kind of like change some stuff up and learn up on
Yeah,
the new second edition rules and kind of change it up around a little bit?
it was tricky because right around when I started writing it is when the remaster happened. So a lot of things got their names changed. A lot of spells got wiped from the official rulebook, and new ones came in. So it was tricky, and there are some new monsters that come in because the OGL ones were, off limits now. So we had to invent some new things. We had to add in some new spell effects, which worked fine with the Mythic rule set because all kinds of new crazy things were happening anyway.
Right.
That was a complicating factor in that particular manuscript. Yeah.
What was it like incorporating mythic rules and mythic abilities and mythic things into the novel? Because you don't really see that too often in the Pathfinder tales, which all, again, kind of follow the rules. You don't really see a lot of mythic stuff in the novels.
Yeah, honestly, it was tricky because I think that story was the first one where I felt like both time and word count were not really sufficient for me to lay as much groundwork as I would have liked to bring out some of those things because there's just like a lot of ground that needed to be covered. And the weirder and more surreal and more, far-reachingly mythic you make things, the longer it takes to explain that.
Yeah.
So there was kind of a tension of just like how wild and psychedelic can you make this stuff in the space of 2 or 3 chapters?
Yeah. I'm very excited about the book. What is one thing you want people to take away from this book after they're done reading it?
Hopefully that the Godsrain is a really cool event with a lot of far-reaching implications that are gonna be really fun to dig into as they continue to evolve. I would hope that people come away with it feeling, I don't know, energized and intrigued and excited to bring these elements into their own campaigns.
That's great. Are there other works possibly in the future?
I don't think I'm allowed to say that for
Okay,
NDA.
that's hey, that is an answer. That is an answer. I'm not allowed to say it is an answer. And I appreciate that. Do you have any other works outside of Pathfinder Paizo that you have coming up down the road?
I think my most recent book before this was for Warhammer's Age of Sigmar, and that was the novel Black Talon, which was also a lot of fun to write and was in a lot of ways good practice for this one because it again involves one of their established canon characters going through an adventure that, for world building, for campaign building reasons, has to be set in a specific way.
Okay.
So that was another one where it's kind of like, we need the characters to do this.
Did you play Warhammer before doing that book?
I did not know. Warhammer is a very different kind of game from what
It
I'm used
is.
to. It seems like I wish I had the skill to paint those minis, but I've that's just never been a skill set that I've had. And a couple of my friends are incredibly good at it. And every time they show me something new, I'm like, whoa,
Right.
how? Like
Yeah.
it's like neurosurgery. How do you like have the fine motor skill to do that?
Yeah. Like, did you do it with a single hair to get that eye, the retina, and
It's incredible. I don't know how they do it. But
I
it also looks extremely expensive. So
I think most hobbies like that are. I mean,
yeah,
technically role playing is pretty expensive too. Every single book is, $30. So
true, yeah.
you want to stack up that bookshelf, you got to definitely put that money out there.
But I hope people think it's worth it. That's my hope. I don't want everybody to buy anything that I've done and be like, that was a bad use of money. So
If you look back to your very first book and then you fast forward to Godsrain, how has your process in writing books changed?
that is a great question. And it's hard to do a clear through line because they're just different types of books. Um, it is almost actually a perfect line of just more editorial, um, I guess, more editorial feedback and direction as you move farther down to the present day. Whereas my early books were just kind of like writing whatever because I felt like it. Um, Definitely, I feel like I've gotten faster at it as time goes by, and I develop more facility with the basic skill set of just like, here's how you build a sentence, here's how you build a paragraph. Um, but then, there always runs the risk of repeating yourself, saying the things that you've said before, using the same words to describe scenes. So that's a continual struggle. And I try not to resort to that. I hope. I hope very much that everything still feels new and fresh. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it gets easier in some ways and harder in others because you know more of what you're doing, but you've also done it so many times before that you constantly have to stretch and find new ground and new ways of conceiving of things.
Yeah, understandable. People that are listening, you can get Godsrain. It's going to be available November 5th, correct?
I think it's actually out. They moved the release
They moved
date
the
up.
release date up.
Yeah.
So it's out
Um,
now.
I think it is out now.
Well, there you
It's
go,
been
guys.
out for a few days, maybe. Yeah.
Go and check out Godsrain. Available anywhere you get your books. Go and check it out. And also, I think the War of the Immortals comes out on the 12th, last I heard. So I think that's coming out. And you had a hand. Did you have a little bit of a hand in that as well? In that main book?
Yes. Yeah, I wrote a little bit of fiction for that book.
Okay. So there you go. You can find all of the things between those two. Between those two books. Of course, go back and check out all the old Pathfinder Tales stuff as well, because they are also awesome. I love the fact that they're, like you said, they're a little bit, they start off a little bit dark. You're playing with something that is looked upon not necessarily in the best of light, and by the end of it, you know, you've got this protagonist that's your main character, that's kind of grown a lot in the novels, and that happens in all of your Pathfinder books. And I just love it. I love it very much. It's been great. So I look forward to more work of yours, Pathfinder or not. I look forward to the more work that you put out there. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here.
People are maybe going to see you at PAX. It sounds like you may or may not be there. So people keep their eye out for news maybe.
When we know for sure, we will announce it for sure. Still trying to figure out like what exactly I'll be doing there. So I can't announce anything concrete yet.
Okay. Sounds good. And of course, they can find you on the Paizo forums from time to time and shoot you a message there or ask questions, and maybe you'll swing in and say hello.
Absolutely, yes.
All right, everybody. If you're listening, please stick around. Those of you in the live stream, go ahead and throw your questions up in the chat for Liane Merciel. We will get to those in just a moment. But first, later this month, we're going to be joined by Shadowrun author Jennifer Brozek. And that's going to be live on the 18th of November. That podcast will be available on the 19th. So if you're a fan of Shadowrun, it's going to be an amazing episode as well. After that, we're going to be joined by Scott Rogers. He's a board game designer. He's did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Marvel Villainous, Alien, so many more. A lot of board games are there by Scott Rogers. He's going to be joining us live December 2nd, that podcast on December 3rd. Not to mention our other guests coming up. Jim Zub is going to be returning. Epic Realms is going to be returning to Epic Realms, and Kevin Hearn is also going to be returning. So you definitely want to check those episodes out. Go ahead, follow, subscribe, like, review, all of the buttons. Push them all. It does help us, and in turn, helps our guests. So don't forget to get Godsrain available right now. As for that, I am Nick, speaking for Leanne Merciel. Thank you for listening to Epic Realms.